Okay, now we know how to make a basic install of the front end, but as I said, you probably don't want to just use the configuration file, the basic one that you get either from the installer or from the RPM. You want to tweak it a little bit. Although that will work, although it probably will not do exactly what you want. So I'll go over the structure of the front-end configuration file, trying to explain every single piece so you know what's inside, why it is there, and how it can be changed. So for starters, the front-end configuration file is just an ordinary XML file that uses the front-end as the top element, and there's nothing really special about it. Any XML editor should be able to read it, and if you import it in Mozilla, it's actually nicely intensive for you. This file is composed of essentially 3 logical groups: an instance description section, a global section, and a group list section where each group that has its own section that is similar to the global section structure. And you get a little more configured description in that link in the manual. Oh yeah, and another thing, the global section and the group sections are tightly related, and the information are then merged at the end. If you remember, the front end is really composed of many groups, and the groups are the ones doing the real jobs. So when a group starts up, it reads its own section, the global section, and merges them together. And how it is merged depends a little bit on what we're talking about, and I'll explain that. So the first section is the description section, and this can be further divided into the base directory network settings, the versioning, its own security settings, the interface to the central manager, and the optimization knobs. The directory and the networking should be already been done for you by the installer. You hardly ever need to tweak them unless you did something really weird. So we have the where you have the work directory, the logs, where it's your stage area that the web server will be reading, and how to get it to www, to HTTP. You may need to change this in case you decide to move your web server and, for example, export it via NFS or something like that. Or decide to sync periodically what is here in another location. This is what the glide is actually used with the worker now. And then, as I said, there's some monitoring, and here essentially you tell it where to write the monitoring files, and where to find the RLD files, which are essentially 3 different pieces that you get from the single cardboard. And you could install them in theory separately. We don't really recommend it. So, what about versioning? The frontend gets its own name, which may or may not be related to the security name. And this is what gets in the class add when it gets to the factory to make requests. However, it is also used to actually create the directory structure where in the work area. What you provide here, you see, you just provide the base work directory, and then the real work directory / frontend _ the actual frontend name. The reason why we usually don't use the same security name as the frontend name is because it makes easy to do upgrades. So sometimes you get from one front end to another that are not completely completely backward compatible. You do a major upgrade from one version of glideinWMS to another, and you cannot just upgrade it in place. There's enough changes that you actually need to create a new work directory. It doesn't help often, but sometimes there are some disruptive changes. And in that case, you don't want to just scratch everything and install from scratch. You may want to preserve what you had already there. So you can essentially just change the version number, a new directory tree will be created from you, and you will start working from there. Another use case is you may actually want to run 2 different front-ends in parallel. One is a test one is the production one. You want to start and stop them completely independently, configure completely independently, and run them in parallel. This is, for example, what we do in CMS. We actually have 3 of them, the production one test. And it's just nice to be able to shut down one completely when it's misbehaving and leave the others up without touching anything. And you cannot really do it with the RPM, but you can definitely do it if you do it with standard installer or anyhow, non-RPM. RPM with the paper you do. And here it is. This is the line, which is in the first line of the XML file that defines that. And essentially, typically, you have, if you use the installer to get the configuration file here, it will have line like this. This will be used to create these directories, the base directory, the log and monitor in it. And the log is really symlink to front logs, front-end v10, and the monitor is actually www, blah, blah, blah. It will also create a front stage for you from the base directory, or front-end times %. So just to see what gets from that line, what gets created. As I said, I need to create this usually from front logs. Now, the next section is the security section. And again, if you use the Q&A installer, this is already populated for you. If you use the RPMs, you would have to modify it because it can just placeholders and requires you to change it. So you have a security name, where you have a proxy, what is the service proxy at the end, what kind of encryption you use the default. And then you have to provide what are the collectors in your pool. These are your collectors, your collectors that you installed yesterday. And you provide where is the main top collector, and then you have to list all the secondary collectors. And if they use consecutive ports, you can use a dash, so you don't need to have 100 lines. And then it's secondary false or true, depending if it is the top or the leaves. Then you have a bunch of optimization knobs. Usually what you get out of the installer is or the RPM, it's already okay, but you can tweak them. Just don't touch this one. This is to tell Condor to use the new multiple with speed Condor advertise, which was added in I think 7.5 or 7.3. Anyhow, quite long ago. Unless you use a really ancient version of Condor, you should keep that as it is. This is how tight the loop should be. You can reduce this if you really want new glidines requested every 5 seconds, but I would really not recommend it because we at the factory may actually complain because you're advertising too much. A couple knobs in case your frontend is crashing, but it should never crash. So it's, if you ever have to dial that up, it means something is really badly broken. And the only part that you may want to consider tweaking is how long you want the logs to be retained. You should dial it up as long as you can afford the disk space for. It's really good to know what the front has been doing for as long as you can. And that's how you define it. It's just this space, it's not using a lot of I/O, but you just need space for this. So, now a nice reminder of how it works, right? We said the front end is really a bunch of groups with the main front end there just essentially to spawn them and do the monitoring aggregation. And as I already mentioned yesterday, each group can potentially look at the different submit nodes and talk to different factories. Doesn't need to. They could all talk to everybody, but they can. This is reflected in the configuration file. And you can only have one center manager really. And this is why I show it that way. You cannot really have different central manager. So in the configuration file, you will have a section about groups. So each group will have its own section, enclosed in a group's attribute range. And you must have at least one group, and the installer will create group main. And if you are not really fancy, you can live with one. But if you need to make different match expressions, different attributes for different groups of users, this is a way to easily separate instead of having an enormously long if in the match expression, which you could always do with this. Unfortunately, this is not recursive, so you can have only one level of groups. So if you need to do a matrix, well, it will not be nice. You just have to have a lot of flat groups. Cube is even worse. And then you have a group section that will be above, and the global section is really something that you use for anything that is common between all the groups. So if you have things that are shared between groups, consider putting it in the global section, and then essentially have the groups only what is specific to the groups. But a lot of things can be put in either one if you have just one in one group. At that point, it's completely arbitrary. But if you have more than one group, that's the logical distinction you would do. So, what goes in both global and the group section? You have a pilot proxy section, an attribute section, and a file section, and a matchmaking section. Plus, the group section has a limit section, which is not in the global one. Although, while I wrote this slide, I said, why not? It just makes sense. So, the pilot proxy section is essentially a list of proxies. So, it's enclosed in the security section, and then you have proxies. You specify the proxy selection plugin. We mentioned it yesterday, and by default, you would probably use the proxy all. And then one line for each private proxy you use, together with the security class if you have one. From that will be the default. And that's it. If you define the sections both in the global and the group section, it will use the sum of both. It will use both the global one and the group ones. So you cannot subtract. You can only add in the group sections for the proxies.
Put the same proxy in both. Which one?
It will use both. It will and they will treat it as different.
It literally just casts the two together.
Yeah, it just does it can. Doesn't try to be any smarter than that.
ABS name stand for?
Hmm?
In the proxy, the attributes ABSF name.
Yeah.
Does that stand for anything?
Absolute file name.
Oh, okay.
Then you have the attribute section. Here is where you define all the attributes that go either to the factory or the glidins, and through the glidins to your Condor class app, or even in the user environment. And this must be static, essentially. And you can have them both in the global and in the group section. And if in an attribute with the same name, it's in both sections, the group one wins. So you can define a generic default in the global section and do it, override it essentially in the group section later on. For example, to deal with exceptions and stuff like that. So the attribute section is attributes and then one line for each attribute. And each attribute essentially has a name, a type, where this type can be either string, integer, or expression, where the expression is essentially the Condor expression, essentially an unquoted string. So if you look at what we told yesterday, Condor class app can reference other attributes. That's what this expression means. So essentially, I can say, I don't know, gliding name. Yeah, you can call it gliding name. It will become that attribute. You can have a value, which is where you would put the value. and then you have these three. Essentially, should be published in the glidings, which means it gets in the contour class ad, the starting class ad, the gliding class ad. So should it get in the user environment, and do you want it to be a parameter or not? This essentially tells, should it go through the factory or should I put it in a file to be downloaded via HTTP? You hardly ever need to put this through. It's there for just a few exceptions. Whatever you want to define that is VO specific, you probably want to keep that false because the factor doesn't need to know what the heck you do in the VO. Stuff like if you want to use glideinExec, you probably should put it through.
So by the factory state, does that mean should it be in the job ad that's sent look to the
It
factory?
gets in the class ad that gets published to the factory to request
glidings.
glidings. So if it is not something the factory expects, it will be just passed through. So it's just higher overhead. There is no good reason for that. But as I said, something like, do you want to use glideinExec? It's something the factory may know, may want to know. Here are a bunch of useful attributes that you may want to set. We mentioned this yesterday, gliding job max time, which is the expected job lifetime, so that you have to retire the set instead of using the default. If you want to expose the grid environment, this is one of the questions that the installer asked you to. Do you want the grid environment to be published in the job environment or not? Should you use glideinExec? Mentioned yesterday, right? And then you have essentially the start expression, which you do glide client group start. And this essentially will be then ended with the factory start expression if the factory added anything for whatever reason to become the requirements for the gliding, for the start date of the glidings. Another one I mentioned yesterday is gliding max idle. How soon should I give up and get out of the way if I'm unclaimed? And the default is 20 minutes if you don't change it. That's a good enough default for most people. Another section that is both in the global and in the group section is the file section. And this is where you can send any file you like to the glidings. And you have both in the global and the group files, and you will get both the global and the group files sent to the worker node, and they be downloaded, and in the scripts, they will be executed in the order in which are listed. And there is flag that says if the group file should be executed before the global ones or the way around. I'll show you an example in a second. So the files that you will likely send down validation scripts, make sure that the environment on the worker node is suitable for your user jobs. Any configuration files that are needed by the validation scripts. Wrappers that can be run before every use, and this is the user job wrapper in Condor. If you never looked at it, click here. You have scripts that set attributes that will be used by somebody else, or dynamic attributes. And if any of these files is a tarball, it can the glidings can actually untar it automatically. And I'll go over this in the next slide. So here is what file section looked like, and I have two. One that is a script, and one that is a tarball. Just I cannot have all the combinations, but here's the two of them. So like before, you have the name, the path to the file. You say if it's constant or not. If you make this to false, it will disable the integrity checks. So you probably don't want to do it unless you have very weird requirements. But it allows you to essentially disable the integrity checks if you really want to be able to change the file in a web area and get always the latest one. Not recommended. Is it executable or not? And since this is a validation script, I say true. Is it a wrapper? I say false. I don't want to run it every time a job runs. do I want to untar it? No. Should it, so this was in the, oh yeah, after entry, true or false. So essentially, the factory is similar to the front end in the sense that it has a global factory section and then per site section. And you can decide if you want to run the script before the site-specific factory scripts or after. Usually you just go through unless the factory tells you that there may be some interaction. It would be better to do it with false. And then here, this is the global section. And so after group equal false essentially says run it before any group scripts. So run it in the order before any group scripts running order. If you put this true, all the scripts will be run in false first, then all the group scripts will be run, and then all the scripts through the global section that have after group equal true. So this way you can run before and after easily. If you want something that is global, that has to be run last after any groups, so it cleans up or whatever. Here's a tarball. I won't describe the first part, but I said untar equal true. So the gliders themselves will untar this tarball for you, but only if this attribute is set, unless you set it true, like here, in which case it will do it always. If you put here anything but true, it will make sure that in the local configuration file, which I will describe in a minute, there is that attribute is actually set. If it is not set, the tarball will remain unpacked onto this. It tells you where to untar it, so it doesn't need to be in the local directory. And it can, if you set it, it can actually set a variable in the local dashboard, which I will describe, to point where this directory, the absolute path in that directory, so you can actually reference it in later scripts. So this is how a file section looks like.
Question on the const.
Yes.
So the idea is I'm not changing this file around. It's a const.
Yes.
I'm not changing it ever. I'm not changing
not so if I change it, I need to reconfigure.
Okay.
So when I reconfigure, it will be put on the stage area with a unique ID. You remember yesterday the caching and the IDs and cache coherence, integrity. If you make it the const, you cannot change it on the web area, or it will fail at the checks. If you do this to false, you will not have the ID. It will disable all the integrity checks, all cache coherence, and you can go on the web area and change it instead of changing it in a different location than do a reconfig.
Okay.
So there are very few reasons to do that.
Right. So I can change my script.sh to my heart's content, and it'll get updated whenever I do a reconfig.
Exactly. So there, as I said, there is a limit section that is only in the group section. So that I don't really remember why we did it that way, but that's what it is. And what the limits are essentially, you have 2 lines for the idle limits and 2 lines for the running limits, and you have 1 per entry and well, this for the growing one. So the idle limits are essentially how aggressive you want to be. So essentially, idle glidings per entry max equal 100 essentially says cap the pressure to 100. Remember the pressure algorithm we said yesterday, how the front end works, divides by 3 and then caps it to a certain number. This is the number. And this reserve, it essentially says, well, ContoG sometimes get it wrong because delays, screws up or something like that. So I want, even if I want 10 more glidings that what I think I strictly minimum is the strictly minimum needed, so I can deal with any possible error. This idle VMs per entry is essentially emergency brake. It essentially looks in the contour status how many glidings are currently not claimed. In this case, if I ever see that I have 50 idle claimed, idle which means unclaimed glidings for that specific entry, stop asking for more because something is wrong. I'm getting glidings that are not being used. So stop. I don't want more. Until they go away, and then it will start more. The curve essentially say, oh, I'm seeing a significant amount of glidings that are not being used, but it may be just a slow negotiator, but maybe the glidings are starting too fast. So slow it down. So essentially, when it reaches this number, essentially the pressure is cut by half. So I just automatically lowers the pressure. This is essentially the max, the real max. It essentially says, whatever happens, if I ever get 5,000 glidings for that specific entry, stop. Don't ask for any more. I have all I need. If I get more, I don't know, something will go wrong. For example, the schedule will die. And this is per entry, per factory entry, per site, essentially. And this is the total. This is essential across all the glidings I ever got. If I get this many studies in my condor collector, stop. I cannot handle more than that. And again, here we have max and curb. If this is the absolute maximum, if I get to curb, I just say reduce the pressure because we are getting close to that. And the relative to Q is essentially, again, I expect that some glidings may have died since and are not yet deregistered from the collector. It takes about 15 minutes, so count a few more. Just make it a little bigger than the straight beam.
So I want to make sure I understand the idle VMs per entry.
Mm-hmm.
So if I get 50, so that configuration there says if I get 50 glide-ins at various sites that
At
don't
each
match
site.
my jobs.
At
Oh,
each
at
site.
each individual
Yeah,
site.
yeah. Per entry.
Right.
Historical reasons. The best slots in Condor were called VMs once upon a time, and we did it once upon a time, and we don't want to change the syntax. More questions? No? Then I move on. We can always discuss this offline if needed.
Just
Yes?
where should we look to see whether this is happening?
In the logs. In the logs, if you ever see 50, that number, you will see it. And the requested idle will drop to 0.
Right.
If you look through the logs and you see requested idle 0, while you have lots of idle jobs, that's a good point. You're essentially hitting that. Now, the matchmaking section, this is a big one. The matchmaking section is actually composed of 3 parts. The factory selection section, the job selection section, and the actual matchmaking bits. And you will probably also want to add an attribute, which is a start expression, which is not in the matchmaking section itself, but it's closely related because we said the front-end section should be similar to whatever is in the start expression because that will be used for matchmaking negotiator. We actually are thinking in the glideinWMS to move this in the matchmaking section, but right now it's completely off, and you will need to do it in the attribute section instead of the matchmaking section, although I'll describe it here. So as I said, the first thing is to make the factory selection. If you remember the image of the refresher that I had a few slides ago, each group can potentially talk to different factories. It doesn't need to, but it can. So, and you have a match section both in the global and in the group section. In each one, you can define a bunch of factories, which is factory, collectors, collector, and this is what you got from the admins, from the factory admins. This information comes straight from the factory admins. You just have to put them in. Don't change it from what they told you, or nothing will work. And you have as many as you need. And then you have to specify what is your match expression. No, this is not match expression. This is actually which class ads I actually want, which factories from that collector I actually want. So in the OIG factory, we use this attribute called gliding supported VOs, which is a list that lists all the VOs that are supported. And you probably want to look only at the factories that support your VO. Because if you start asking for glidings for any sites that don't support your VO, you will not get any glidings anyhow. So this is how you essentially limit the amount of factories you actually see. The factory class ads you actually see from those collectors.
And that's a list maintained by the factory, not by the site admins.
Right. The factory should sync with the sites and BDII, whatever means they have to get that list and keep it updated. And we may actually remove some from the list, even if the site claims to support it, if we know that they don't, for whatever reason. So that one should be the ones that we expect to work for that VO. And if a VO thinks that we don't have them in and they want to go there, they should ask us and we'll just add it. Maybe our fault, or you may think you are supported somewhere and you're not. You have a similar section for the jobs. So essentially, you will specify from which SCADs to query and for what kind of jobs. The default is just look for the vanilla jobs, which is job universe equal 5. So if the users are submitting, for example, grid jobs in the same SCAD, you don't want anyone to consider them. They are not something that will be matched with the glidings. Even if they are the same SCAD, they are completely different fish. They have nothing to do with what the gliding would ever look for. And again, yeah, list all the SCADs and then this is a content query. It can be arbitrarily complicated. If you want to partition different jobs in different groups, this is the right place to do it. Essentially, just filter them out at the query. This actually does under Q minus constraint, that string. And then you have to actually write your match expression. And this is a Python expression. And the factory attributes have this syntax, essentially gliding attributes, and then the name of the attribute. And the job attributes are just job and the name of the job attribute. And then it's an arbitrary Python expression that evaluates. If it values true, it matches. If it values the false, it doesn't. It must be only one line. It will be this nicely formatted. See the text now. However, that was the easy part. That was the 101, and now to actually make it work, you have to add a little piece more. When you have the factory and the job sections, you actually have to specify which attributes to extract from the factory class ads and from the job class ads, because it's essentially an optimization knob, the required one. So you usually the class ads is huge, both the job and the factory ones. If we were to fetch all the attributes, it would use lots of memory and it would be painfully slow. So we asked the admins to actually tell us which attributes you actually plan to use and essentially whitelist them. These are the only attributes that will be put with condor Q and condor status using the minus format command from condor. So nothing that is not listed here can be used here because it will not be available. What is here is not guaranteed to be here because it may not be in the attribute, but what is not here is guaranteed not to be here. And you will also need to specify what type are you expecting that to be. It can be either string, integer, real or full app. Clear enough? I see some pensive faces.
Just brings back I mean, I guess my question is, or my thought is, why can't you extract those attributes into some Python expression or something?
We got it's just easier this way.
Easier for you.
So-
Yeah.
Which is
what-
important, but yeah.
You're using the class add library in this. There's just
Yeah, we don't.
a library function to say name all the attributes that are
We don't.
required.
So can you give some hints on how to actually debug this stuff? Because, I mean, it's,
We have a section about monitoring.
huh?
We have a section about monitoring in the afternoon. Yeah, and I'll answer the question on that point. So, as I said, while not part of the match section, you actually want to add a start expression in your configuration while you are thinking about the Python match expression that is used by the frontend. This is because we have the two-level matchmaking, and if the two policies are not in sync, something will go wrong. And yes, you don't need to do it here. You can ask the users to put the right requirements, but we know the users cannot be really trusted. And it's just much easier to do it here. So I would really recommend to do it here and have the empty requirements for the users. It just makes life way easier. There are two attributes that you can set. What is glide client start and glide client group start. And while you can put them anywhere, the idea is that you put this in the group section, in the global section, it is in the group section, and they will be ended together. So you can have both and without overriding. As I said, if you have two attributes with the same name, in both the global and the group section wins, and the global one is never existed. This way you can have set both, and they will be just ended together. And here you have an example. If you have the famous glide inside in desired sites, then this is the attribute where you have glide group client, value is string list member, blah blah blah, and again glide publish false, job publish false, parameters true, and this thing. Now, anybody that ever used any configuration file, sometimes it's just nice to comment stuff out, right? Or add a comment to remember why you did some things. So, you can do it here too. And you can do it two ways. You can use the XML compliant plain XML comments, or you do something that Frontend uses in addition. So the standard XML way of doing it is just something with less exclamation point minus minus, anything between minus minus greater, and anything is between, if you consider a comment, and ignored, literally ignored. It's not seen by any XML parser. So here's an example. I had a factory defined in my configuration file. I commented out. I don't need it anymore. Actually, this is wrong. No, this is just a comment. This is just a comment. This is just a comment for this one. And here instead, I had a group that I commented. And of course, it's missing a large part. However, the problem with the XML comments is that they're not seen by any XML parser. So if you have any XML parser that is reading in the XML file, doing something with it, and writing it back, the comments are lost because they're not seen. And actually, the reconfig usually rewrites your XML file to add all any defaults that are missing, so that when you look at it, you actually see what you use. So all the defaults are actually in the XML file after reconfig. It can be disabled, and it is disabled by default in the RPM. But if you have installed it not by RPMs, it's actually enabled. So every time you do a registry, any comment, XML comments will be lost. Which it's unfortunate, but if you want to have any kind of XML manipulation, there's no way around it. So what the frontend does to help you with that is all the tags can have an attribute that is called comment. And you can put any arbitrary string. It will not use for anything, it's just there just for you. You can put in any of the tags comment equals something, and this is your reminder. And since it is standard XML attribute, even if it has no semantics, or the semantics is no op, it will survive any manipulation. It will stay there. So when you want to comment something, do it that way. That, of course, doesn't solve the problem of commenting out entire sections, and there is nothing in really in generic in the frontend to help you with that. But you can disable an entire group presenting enabled equal false, and that essentially the group will stay there and will just not be used. It's equivalent of saying no op. Okay, I know it's there, I will preserve it between the configs, but I will really not use it. And this is important because you must never remove a group, because you will not be able to give it back. So you cannot add a new group with the same name of a group that existed in the past. This is just because how internally the factory the frontend works. And if you try it, it will just fail on a config. It will just say the directory already exists, go away. So you will need to invent a new name if you do that. Much better to just disable a group if you don't need it for a while. And if you ever decide that you want it again, just de-enable it. So there is no way to put a complete XML on a slide. So I will do an interactive pass-through with a couple of XML files that we have been using in CMS. They are slightly modified, sanitized, prettified, but they are very close to the real ones.
Interactive pass-through equal live demo?
Yeah. So. Can you see it, or it's too small? Okay. So here you see what the actual XML would look like. So you have the usual section where you describe what you are. You have the usual directory stuff, pretty boring. Then you have the security stuff. This is my service proxy, this is my DN. I actually use multiple proxies, so I defined in the lower section that I use proxy use map with recycling, which is a fancy one. And these are my collectors. I have a top one and a bunch of secondary collectors. Nothing particularly fancy here. Then, usually the attribute section comes on top of the match section, simply because of the alphabetic ordering. But let's start with the lower one. And this is our match expression.
That's the one I want to explain how to debug that one.
I will try to do it this afternoon. So essentially, as you see, there are a lot of ors, ands. It essentially says, I want to first try, if a job hasn't started yet, I use the expected job lifetime. If the job doesn't define a lifetime, I default to 1. If a job hasn't started, I will use the pessimistic job lifetime evaluation value. And if the job didn't expressively set 1, I will use the default. I will also not start jobs that are too big. I know that you have used too much. And if they started too many times, and if they will restart it very recently. It's pretty much in a nutshell. And this is reflected in the gliding client start within the Condor speak. It's essentially saying the same thing, just in a different language. And then here, I essentially say, I only want to get the factory sites that support CMS, that have job max time defined, max workload time defined, time spread defined, and gliding max MBs defined, because it makes my Python expression much easier, because I have else for loop for undefined, which is a little annoying in Python. And these are the attributes that I actually use, and this is the factories I'm talking to. And I have an equivalent for the jobs, where I say, I just care about vanilla universe jobs, make sure it's not the monitoring job, and it's not the ITP jobs. So I have some ITP jobs that I match with the different front end, and just don't look at them here. And these are the attributes that I actually use. And these are the sketches I'm talking to, and as you can see, they're all over the place. Certain further left than used to be. Then, still in the global section, I have a bunch of attributes apart from the start. I said, yes, I want the grid environment to be exposed to the users. I want to use GLExec. Let's see it. It's set to optional, which means use it wherever possible. If it's not installed, oh well. I still want to use the site for now. And use mesh authentication to, I could remove this is now default. And I have two global files that I'm sending to the worker node. One is a validation script. It looks for the CMS software, and if it's not there, it will fail. And the other one I actually run before each and every job. And it's just a small script that sets home to current working directory. It just CMS tries to be too smart for its own good. And if I don't do that, jobs fail. Because they expect different environment to be ready. But they used to. I'm not sure if they fixed it already or not, but it doesn't work. And then I have a single group. So I have the limits, as I mentioned before, pretty much standard. I decided to put the proxies in the group section. They could be in the main global sections, but we were planning to have in two groups with two different kinds of proxies. So this is how we did it, and we kept it this way. But it's pretty arbitrary at this point because we have a single group. And I have moved some of the start expression and match expression in the group. Again, pretty arbitrary. This could all be in the main section, but it was just easier because this is really, what was on top is really sanity matchmaking, and this is really how I select the sites. So by splitting them in two, since I have a single group, it just makes a lot more, it's a lot easier to read than putting everything in a single one, but it's pretty arbitrary apart from that. I just add a few attributes, no new factories, and again, yeah, of course, the relative expression, and a few attributes and no new skeptics. So pretty vanilla, apart from the long match expression, which I would say is what most people should be using, something along those lines. Then I have another front end. It's also from VO, from CMS, and they both, as I said, you can run more than one on the same node, and actually we run both of these on the same node, same user. And okay, the top one is the same, this is the same, this is pretty much the same, the files are the same, what is nice about this one, it's this is all the same pretty much. Well, almost. I just say I only want to use a few sites and I have code them. And it's semi-experimental. What we do here is the so-called overflowing. We recently in CMS started to use the remote access to files through XML. And this overflow, actually it was in the top, but there is a important reason up here. And the idea being that in the past, CMS has essentially run jobs where the data was. So when user submitted the job, it says, run at this site because this is where my data are. The file staging to various sites is handled asynchronously by a central team in CMS. I don't want to go into details, but not all sites get all the data. So the users, when they submit, they say, I want to run at this site because the data there. However, some data sets are particularly popular, and so many users submit to those sites that they can wait for weeks before they get any CPU because they are just too popular. So if that happens, we move some of these users without them knowing or without them asking to other sites that have spare CPU and then deliver data over the wide area network. You will lose between around 5% in efficiency. Of course, you load the network, but the users get their results sooner, so it's a good thing. So what this overflow frontend is, it says, if a job has been queued for more than 6 hours, consider it for overflow. And if, but this is just for matchmaking, there is nothing in the start expression that says that. I actually don't define it in the global section, so yeah, it's not there. And after that, I essentially say, if the overloaded site was Nebraska, any job that asks to run a Nebraska, write anywhere else. Because I know that if they start pretty much anywhere else, they will be able to read jobs from Nebraska. So essentially, I am tricking the users to run somewhere else where they were not expecting to. And the start expression is actually now saying, well, if even the user said that the desired site is Nebraska, write anywhere else. I don't care. So it's just a different way of configuring your front end in ways that you essentially can do the stuff on user's behalf without them really asking for. Completely dynamic, and we can turn on and off this as needed, and users don't have to do a thing. The reason we do it as a separate front end, it's just easier instead of trying to merge it in the other one, because it's a little twisty as a logic. So we can use the global section and stuff like that, since you don't have nested hooks.